Art chats are offered every week on Thursdays at noon. Next week will be artist Craig Colarusso discussing his sound and motion-powered sculptures, and he'll be engaging audiences in creating a symphony of digital sound during the art chat program. So join us for that, and I'll drop the registration in the chat momentarily. Virtual programs like this one seek to bring art to audiences at home and connect people to each other, a goal more important now than ever. Please consider donating to the museum or becoming a member to support programs like these. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Margaretta Frederick, our Annette Willard Provine Curator of the Bancroft Pre-Raphaelite Collection at the Delaware Art Museum.
Okay. Hi. Am I sharing my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Small victory for mankind. So, thank you all for joining us. Today's speaker is David Bentley, a distinguished university professor and the Carl F. Klink Professor in Canadian Literature at Western University in London, Ontario. Professor Bentley will be speaking on Dante Gabriel Rossetti's La Bella Mano. Of course, this painting is hanging in the museum's Pre-Raphaelite galleries, part of the Samuel and Mary Bancroft bequest. So I thought I'd start today by giving a very brief introduction. Firstly, explaining how the painting came to be in the Bancroft collection. Secondly, providing a little context with regard to where and how the painting fits in within Rossetti's life and work. And thirdly, we'll get to the heart of the chat with Professor Bentley's findings. You just make some screen adjustments here. Okay. So Samuel Bancroft, whose collection was bequeathed to the Delaware Art Museum in 1935, viewed the acquisition of La Bella Mano as possibly the most important painting to enter his possession. And we can catch a bit of that excitement that the purchase garnered if we take a look at the set of telegrams which were exchanged between himself and Gerald Agnew, his representative at the London dealers of Agnew & Co. Gerald was bidding on the painting for Bancroft at an auction from the collection of Sir Cuthbert Quilter in July of 1909. Quilter was a second-generation patron of the Pre-Raphaelites and had some really fabulous things in his collection. In June, Agnew notified Bancroft of the upcoming sale. Bancroft cabled back immediately and said, "What will Bella Mano bring?" Agnew replied, "Picture looks very fine, fancy 2,500. To which Bancroft responded, "Take Bella Mano, at best under 2,600. I think it's hard for us today to imagine the difficulty in trying to fix a cap on a bid at an auction that's taking place across an ocean and in a different time zone when there's no internet and not even telephone in this case. But luck prevailed, and on July 9th, Agnew cabled Bancroft, bought picture 2,000, hearty congratulations. To which Bancroft jubilantly responded, "Thanking you for your care in the matter and trusting I've got the best Rossetti in existence." The Quilter sale took place in 1909, 25 years or so prior to Rossetti beginning work on the painting. To provide a little context, I thought it might be helpful to understand where Rossetti was in terms of his career between the years of 1874 and 1875, when he began working on the sonnet and thinking about a painting reflecting its sentiments. In his personal life, these were some years of some significance. In 1874, William Morris decided to dissolve the partnership of Morris, Marshall, Faulkner & Co., reorganizing the company under his own proprietorship. The process involved buying out the original partners. And despite a £1,000 compensatory payment, both Ford Madox Brown and Rossetti were not very happy with this outcome. Brown, in fact, completely cut off his relationship with Morris and Burne-Jones over the transaction. At least in part, the reorganization and breakup of the firm also led to Rossetti's departure from Kelmscott Manor. This is the home in the Cotswolds, just a little north and east of London, which he had jointly leased with Morris in 1871. From the fall of 1872 through the summer of 1874, Rossetti enjoyed pretty much free reign at Kelmscott, where he carried out a much talked about and known affair with Morris's wife, Jane. But in the summer of 1874, he departed from the house for the last time, and the joint lease was not renewed. His departure was perhaps further augmented by what appears to be a cooling of the relationship with Jane Morris. She wrote to her friend Wilfred Blunt that her intimacy with Rossetti had come to an end. And while all this happened over the course of 24 months between 1874 and 1875, the end result really signified the final closure of the period of camaraderie and shared creative spirit and production that resulted from the formation of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood back in 1847-48. In many ways, Rossetti's art of this period reflects this transition, as he turned away from the earlier medievalism we associate with the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and toward a new style aligned with the aesthetic movement. We know, for instance, that he visited Whistler's first one-man exhibition at the Flemish Gallery in Pall Mall in the summer of 1874, and Whistler was, of course, the prime instigator in the visual manifestation of the aesthetic movement with the art for art's sake mantra. Rossetti's visual output of these 2 years reflects this kind of stylistic volte-face. These were the years when he painted, for example, Rosa Triplex in a private collection, and the model for this painting was May Morris. Roman Widow from the Musée d'Art de Ponce, with Alexa Wilding as the model, a relatively new face in his canvases, one who would appear in numerous images as Jane Morris became less and less available to sit. But he also completed Proserpine with Jane Morris as the sitter, a painting now at Tate Britain in London. And here she is as Proserpine, the Empress of Hades, a captive goddess, and you can read whatever biographical or autobiographical elements you'd like into that choice of subject. And finally, the Blessed Demisel, a painting now in the Fogg Art Museum at Harvard. This is a painting that he had begun and continued to work on through these years for his very loyal patron, William Graham. And it includes here a predella panel modeled on Italian Renaissance altarpieces. Graham, of course, was a great collector of Italian Renaissance paintings, and we know from previous chats that Rossetti was also very much influenced by the Italian Renaissance. In this case, the predella serves to separate the earthly and the heavenly realms in this particular subject. So that's a brief kind of a where we are in Rossetti's life as we turn to La Bella Mano. And I just want to give a brief introduction, further introduction to Professor Bentley before he gets started. He is a distinguished university professor and the Carl F. Klink Professor in Canadian Literature at Western University in London, Ontario. He was born and raised in Kenya and holds degrees from 3 Canadian universities and a PhD from King's College London. In the course of his career, he has published widely in fields of Canadian literature and culture, Victorian literature and art, and on the importance of the arts and humanities, and more broadly, creativity in society. His recent and forthcoming publications include Dante Gabriel Rossetti's Joseph Accused Before Potiphar, in the British Art Journal, the character of Pre-Raphaelite poetry and fictional prose in the Journal of Pre-Raphaelite Studies, and earlier this year, Curiosity and Desire of Beauty, Dante Gabriel Rossetti's The Beloved and Some Contingent Aesthetic Considerations in the University of Toronto Quarterly. So I'll turn it over to Professor Bentley, and David, let me know when you'd like me to advance the slides.
Professor Bentley, you're muted. I'm going to try to unmute you now. I'm having some trouble on my end. Will you try on your end? Perfect.
Any better? Okay. Sometimes following an introduction like that, which is so kind and generous, I wish my mother were alive because she never wanted me to go into academics. She wanted me to be, like all mothers, I suspect, a doctor. I'm going to talk about La Bella Mano from 4 different angles today, and I'll just tell you what they are so you can watch for them and see them coming. First of all, I'm going to talk a bit about the role of the purchaser of the painting, who is Mary Marks, a curiosity dealer in London, and then talk a little bit, and Margaretta has gazumped me on this a bit, talk a little bit about the aesthetic dimensions to the painting, and then I'm going to return to its pre-Raphaelite roots and talk about what William Michael Rossetti, Rossetti's brother, called small actualities made vocal of lofty meanings, by which he just meant really significant details, objects that have some kind of allegorical significance. And there are a fair number of those in La Bella Mano, and I think there are some that haven't been noticed or haven't been unpacked yet. And finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about the role of Venus and Rossetti's conception of Venus in the painting. So to begin with the role of the patron in this picture. I've been hard at work on La Bella Mano, for which you saw a rough design. Rossetti told one of his patrons, Frederick Richard Leyland, "It will be the very best of its kind I have done. The head, hair, neck, and which I have kept me is more luminous in every way." So Mr. Bancroft, in a certain sense, got his wish. Sales pitch offered La Bella Mano to Leyland with the risk that he respond within 2 days because someone is likely to come in who would probably snap up the picture if unsold. Pressure tactic failed, and La Bella Mano remained unsold until the 14th of February, 1875, when it was commissioned by the connoisseur and curiosity dealer, Mary Marks, with whom Rossetti had been friends since the mid-1860s, when Marks helped him to furnish his 18th century house in Cheyne Walk, Chelsea. London's leading dealer in blue and white china pots have known of La Bella Mano since at least early May 1874, when Rossetti, fearing that one of his maid pieces of Cornwall had broken a blue jar that he had lent her, instructed his assistant Henry Treffray Dunn to take the jar to him for air. And if that proved impossible, say one, because, quote, "it forms a necessary part of the balance of my proposed picture," that is La Bella Mano. In fact, the vase was painted out subsequently. In the event, Marx's biographer G.C. Williamson marked that he was blue jar, all that Marx contributed to La Mano. Before it was finished, for the night.
Professor Bentley, you are breaking up quite a bit. let's take a moment and why don't you try turning your video off for a moment and we'll see if that improves the sound quality. If not, I might have you call in to the meeting if needed. And Professor Bentley, you're now muted, so
Okay.
there we go. We hear you.
Can you? And I'm not breaking up?
We can hear you. You sound clear right now.
Okay, super. Did most of what I just said get through?
Unfortunately, no.
Well, just let me summarize very, very briefly. Harry Marx eventually bought the picture, and now I'm going to talk about the contributions that he made to it, because he made considerable contributions to it, which I don't think have been picked up on properly and explored. So, nor was the blue jar all that Marx contributed to La Bella Mano before it was finished, shortly before the 19th of July, 1875. A silver toilet coster, and that slide, please, Margaretta, that's slide number 4. The silver toilet coster that you can see beside the jug, that in fact was silver to begin with, but Rossetti had it gold plated, which cost a fortune for Marx to get off. So he was not at all pleased with what happened there. A convex mirror, next slide please, which you can see behind the lady's head. And it kind of halos her head, so it gives her a rather sacred, divine kind of appearance. So I'll come back to that. A brass urn surmounted by a winged figure. That's the next slide, please, which was in Marx's sitting room at his house. And the next slide, please, a Grey de Flandre vase to house that lemon plant, which I'll be getting back to in a little while as well. And on occasion, poor Marx was dispatched to Covent Garden to pick up flowers to go in the picture. Every detail concerning this wonderful picture was discussed by the two men, states Williamson, on the strength of information provided by Marx. And if ever Marx was responsible for a fine imaginative work, he was for this one. Rossetti, of course, had the original idea, but it was amplified by the conversation of the two friends. And the various details of the picture were all the subject of careful conversation. Marx always stated that he was consulted about many of the smaller descriptive items in Rossetti's pictures, adds Williamson. But in this particular one, there was not a single thing, he said, introduced into the picture which was not the subject of careful consideration on the part of himself and the artist. As further evidence of this, Williamson cites two objects in the picture that were owned by Rossetti: a spiral hairpin. Next slide, please. You can see it there sticking out of the jar. And next slide, please, a three-coiled snake bracelet. The bracelet, he sent Marx for him to come and see at once. He was so excited about it. And he was also begged Marx to come and see the spiral headpin that he had designed. So that's the role of Marx in it, which I'll come back to a tiny bit later. Now, the link to the aesthetic movement. So if we go back to the whole picture, please. The earliest, and for several years, the fullest published account, response to La Bella Mano, came in pictures by Miss Rossetti, by Frederic George Stephens, in the August 14, 1875 number of the Athenaeum. Quoting almost verbatim from a letter by Rossetti, in which Rossetti provided him with notes to several poems, Stephens observes that the title, La Bella Mano, may remind Italian readers of the well-known Petrarchan series of sonnets by Giusto di Conti, written and published in 1440. So could we have the full painting, please, Margaretta? Perfect. This is Stephens quoting Rossetti about the picture. The picture is, however, simply a painter's fancy and only dependent on pictorial qualities, aesthetic qualities. It belongs to what may be called, on one account at least, the class of toilet pictures, where the lady or Venus, and please take note of that, the lady or Venus has her attendant loves or cupids. Here the lady is washing her hands in a cistern and a basin of metal, while two white-robed and red-winged loves are in attendance, one holding the towel in readiness, the other having on a silver tray the adornments destined for the beautiful hand. A mirror behind her head reflects the room and bed. The bed is, in fact, Rossetti's own bed at Chaniwal. These elements are deep in tone. A fire is burning in the chimney nook. The pictorial object of this work has been to show the brilliancy of flesh tints and whites, relieved on a ground subdued to the eye, and yet everywhere replete with varied color and material. In his ensuing account of the painting, Stephens mingles praise for the painting. The work is a marvel of art. It has rare success in rendering interior light and so on, with a detailed and mildly erotic description of the lady's features, posture, and garments. Her slightly parted lips are red in their vitality, and the abundant noble bosom is voluptuous, not luscious. Now he's using luscious in a negative sense there, which is too delicious, too cloying. The figure is standing in profile, so the masses of deep golden hair which project from her brow cast shadows on the upper part of her face. Her dress is a dark maroon with a scarf of lighter tint of the same hue. Perhaps taking his cue from almost entirely dependent on pictorial qualities in Rossetti's letter, Stephens departs from his predominantly aesthetic account of the lady to touch upon her feelings, her interiority, her ideas. The sentiment of the design lies in the face and is discoverable in the light of the lady's hope, which fills the eyes and has given a warmer rose tint to the full and slightly parted lips. That the lady is gazing upwards, as are her two loves or cupids, is consistent with Rossetti's depiction of hope as a figure with eyes upcast in his sonnet Love Enthroned, which became the opening sonnet in the final version of his sonnet sequence, The House of Life. It's also consistent with the appearance of such figures looking upwards in many later paintings, including Astarte, Syriaca, and others that could readily be trotted off. So this picture is an aesthetic work. It is a work that shows the influence of James McNeill Whistler. But now I'd like to go forward and talk about some of the significant details in it, using the work of a few other writers as well. But first, I'd like to read the sonnet because it offers a wonderful, valuable stimulus to interpretation. It's an apostrophe to the lady's hand. It addresses the hand at the beginning and in fact throughout the 14 lines. O lovely hand, that thy sweet self doth lave in that thy pure and proper element, water of course. Whence erst the lady of love's high advent was born, and endless fires sprang from the wave, that's Venus. Even as her loves to her their offerings gave, for thee the jeweled gifts they bear, while each looks to those lips of music measured speech the fount, and of more bliss than man can crave. In royal wise ring-girt and bracelet spanned, a flower of Venus's own virginity. Now that's an interesting phrase. I'd like to come back to it. Go, shine among thy sisterly sweet band in maiden-minded converse, delicately evermore white and soft, until thou, O hand, penciled in a lover's hand. So clearly the dominant theme of the sonnet is virginity, the virginity of the lady, for whom the apostrophized hand is a synecdoche. It's a part for the whole of her. The hand is white. The water in which it laves is pure and proper, and it is enjoined to engage in maiden-minded converse until heart-handselled in a lover's hand, which is to say, given in love on an occasion of beginning, presumably marriage, an inference supported in the painting by the allusions to Jan van Eyck's Arnolfini marriage in the convex mirror and the four-poster bed. You could go to slide 10, please. Forward one again, Margaret. So you can see the convex mirror at the back, and of course the four-poster bed on the right. And this is one of the most symbolically rich paintings in the European tradition. It was purchased by the National Gallery in 1842. So the Pre-Raphaelites knew it, loved it, drew from it a lot. The theme of virginity prior to sexual consummation in marriage is further reflected in the painting by several accessories associated with the Virgin Mary, including the large white towel held by one of the loves, Amori in the Italian version of the sonnet. Could you go to slide 11, please, now? So as Alicia Craig Faxon notes, the iris in the background and the lemon tree in the foreground are symbols of the Virgin, and the rose plant behind the lady is a symbol of both the Virgin and Venus. However, there's a catch here. The rose plant has as yet no flowers, which serve as blatant symbols of female sexuality in Lady Lilith and other works, including notoriously Venus Verticordia. This is slide 14. Oops, that's the iris. So go forward, please. That's okay. Go back to the iris. Oh, there's Venus Verticordia. So these flowers that you see at the front and the back, the roses and the honeysuckles, absolutely disgusted John Ruskin. He thought they were repulsive, absolutely totally distasteful, and felt that Rossetti had gone off the rails. Well, one reason for that is that since Linnaeus had sexualized flowers, and to male and female, it was impossible to look at a blossom like this without thinking of sex and sexuality. And I think if you look at some of these blossoms, particularly the ones at the front, it's very, very difficult not to see them as sexually charged images. So the fact that the rose plant in La Bella Mano has no flowers as yet suggests that it is, as it were, a virginal plant, so to speak. That the convex mirror surrounding the lady's head like a halo reflects a fire as well as a four-poster bed suggests the sanctification of physical love by Venus that became a central theme of Rossetti's work a decade earlier and would remain so in many of his later paintings and poems. Reinforcing this sanctification is the presence and indeed the coloration of the lady's two attendant cupids. Evocative of both Cupid and of angels, their robes are white and red, the colors of innocence and passion. And I'd just like to pause for a moment. If you could go back to the tulips, Margarita, that's great. Nobody has commented on these tulips, and I would make the suggestion that they are a kind of homage to Marx, because he was of Dutch extraction. He visited Holland frequently, and he had many Dutch friends. And these tulips are unusual in that they are two flowers on one stem. So my suggestion is that they might be a kind of gesture towards him and his wife, whom Rossetti drew several pictures of. The other odd thing in the picture picture that no one has commented on really is the lemon plant at the front. It's given enormous prominence, and yet it is rarely associated, and there it is, rarely associated with the Virgin Mary. I could find only one painting that Rossetti might have known of that has a lemon in it. But lemons are very important to Jews, to Jewish people. And Bernard Marx was raised, Murray Marx was raised as an Orthodox Jew. Of course, in the Jewish religion, this is an etrog, which is one of the plants of Leviticus. It's one of the plants used in the festival of Sukkot, and it has many female characteristics and associations, including with pregnancy, including with fertility, and so on. So that may be a reason, if Marx in fact helped him to pick all of these components of the picture, that those two elements are present in it. So now finally, to the role of Venus. There are several references to Venus in the sonnet, and of course in the picture as well. And probably these could be construed as more complex, even and more interesting than the Christian elements of the picture. As you'll recall, Rossetti told Stephens that the figure was the lady or Venus, a statement that does not so much link alternatives as introduce a synonym or explanation. And in the sonnet, Rossetti described her hand as a flower of Venus's own virginity, a statement that identifies her as a manifestation of the goddess's virginity. In both places, reference is made to the myth that Venus was born from the sea and floated ashore at Paphos in Cyprus on a huge half shell. Slide 16, please. And this, of course, is the most famous rendition of that by Botticelli, The Birth of Venus. In the painting, she is shown, Venus, the lady, washing her hands in a scallop-shaped basin, so clearly linking her to the figure of Venus. That Venus was a virgin at her birth may provide a sufficient explanation for the phrase Venus's own virginity and for her presence in the painting and sonnet. However, there may be a further and more recondite and interesting explanation that warrants brief examination, and this is my last few comments. In the fourth book of Ovid's Fausti, now Fausti by the Roman poet Ovid is not a very well-known book. For Ovid's Ars Amore, the art of love, is much better known. Fausti is a compendium of Roman feasts and rituals for certain days of the year. And the interesting thing is that Rossetti owned a copy of it. It was in his library around 1866, so it predates this painting by about a year. I've suggested elsewhere that Rossetti consulted the Fausti for his depiction of Venus in Venus Verticordia. In fact, the phrase Venus Verticordia comes from the Fausti. Then he might have found, would probably have found, the account of a ritual commemoration in which the women were to play the role of Venus's attendants at Paphos after her birth from the sea during an annual event that renewed Venus's virginity. Now, clearly for the classical world, virginity was a much more complex thing, a much less physical thing than it is for our understanding of the idea. Brief as it is, I think the account may feed into the meaning of La Bella Mano. Here it is in English. Take off the golden necklaces from the marble neck of the goddess. Take off her gauds, her decorations. The goddess must be washed from top to toe. Then dry her neck and restore to it her golden necklaces. Now give her other flowers. Now give her the fresh blown rose. essential to this passage and to La Bella Mano are washing a rose, either a flower or a plant, the removal of jewelry. In the painting, of course, the lady's spiral and butterfly hairpins are attached to that blue jar behind her. The loves carry her rings on a silver tray, and another bracelet is held by the same love in another hand. As in the final lines of La Bella Mano, Ovid's entry for April the 1st goes on to refer to the end of Venus's virginity in marriage, when Venus was first escorted to her eager spouse. From that day forward, she was a bride. If Marx was, as he claimed, consulted about many of the smaller descriptive items in Rossetti's pictures, then he played a part not only in the provision of accessories in La Bella Mano and other works, but also in the small actualities made vocal of lofty meanings that helped to flesh out Rossetti's foundational idea. How far such consultation extended will almost never, certainly never be known. But in La Bella Mano, it may have been extensive enough to grant Marx the distinction of being an iconographic as well as aesthetic collaborator on the picture, a role played at different stages in Dante Gabriel Rossetti's career by his sister Christina, by William Hopland Hunt, by William Morris, by William Bell Scott, and of course others, including Burne-Jones. Hyperbole aside, Marx's biographer, P.C. Williams, had grounds for asserting, perhaps, that if ever Marx was responsible for fine, imaginative work, he was for this one. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bentley. Are there questions or comments from those in attendance?
So I have a question. David, is there any, and I might have missed this, so sorry. Is there anything that connects Marx to the Fausti?
No, not that I know of. He was raised an Orthodox Jew. He was an extremely learned man. He abandoned his Jewishness quite young. He certainly was extremely well read. He was actually a friend for a time of Spinoza, the philosopher. So it gives you an idea. He moved in fairly intellectual circles, so I wouldn't be surprised if he knew the Fausti. But I think it's significant enough for me that Rossetti owned a copy of the Fausti and clearly consulted it, I would think.
That's great, thank you.
There's a question in the chat about the, in the prominent Battenberg lace tablecloth are two bird images. Is there symbolism to them? Are they a phoenix or a griffin or something else?
You know, that I have a footnote about them because I'm at a loss to explain them. I think they're harpies. They could be phoenixes, but what I do know is that that they were on the tablecloth that Rossetti fancied in Marx's house, and he just said, "I'll take that," and whisked the tablecloth away. So whether he saw the symbolism of it or whether he just liked the pattern, I'm not entirely sure. But it was one more thing contributed, albeit unwillingly, by Marx to the picture.
Thank you. And another question about just giving some context on women's roles. How were virgins viewed differently than today?
In the 19th century?
In the time of the painting, yes.
Sorry, just repeat the question if you would.
Yep, how were virgins viewed differently than today?
In the 19th century, in Rossetti's day.
I believe that's what the questioner is asking. Danielle, feel free to correct us if you want.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
in the 19th century, I think very probably, as in the 18th century, female virginity would have been extremely highly valued in a bride. It's very, very difficult to tell, but that is certainly what one would be led to believe about the Victorian period. And of course, if you go back to the 18th century, to Alexander Pope's The Rape of the Lock, the joke, if you call it that, throughout The Rape of the Lock, is that when the young lady's lock of hair gets stolen, it's tantamount to stealing her virginity, which makes her unmarriageable. And in the 19th century, women's emancipation was on the way. There were many independent women in the Rossetti circle. But judging by Rossetti's work, he had fairly orthodox understandings of virginity.
Thank you. And another comment from Dee. Dee, do you mind asking your comment, unmuting yourself?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I've always thought that the two attendants, by virtue of what could be red wings, were also identified as seraphim, who are the highest order of angels, at least in my understanding. Does that tie in at all for you with the other links to, Mary and virginity and religion? Is that something you've run into?
No, that specifically to link them to seraphim, no, I haven't run into that, and I don't think that anybody has noticed that and made the link.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you for making it.
Well, I may have made that suggestion to some of the visitors to the museum, so perhaps I need to dial that back a little bit for now.
Oh, no, I wouldn't if it's an original idea, and why not treat them to it?
All right, thank you.
David,
Actually, you've just made me notice something which I haven't noticed before, and I'm going to bring in the title of a book that I'm not sure I even know how to pronounce, but it's the Hypnerotomachia Polyphili, and it was published in 1499 in Venice, and Rossetti owned not one, but two copies of it. And it is a huge repository of Pre-Raphaelite symbolism and imagery. And I'm just noticing it now because one of the elements of the Hypnerotomachia is that the young woman who is pursued by the protagonist is Polia, and she is virginal when he meets her. A great emphasis is placed on her virginity, particularly on the fact that she wears what's described as the girdle of Venus, which is a belt very similar to the one worn by the angel that you've just called my attention to, around the loins, around the hips. And so that could be yet a further reference to or gesture towards virginity in the picture. So thank you.
Another question, Rossetti and Shakespeare in Dream, there's a line about a double cherry on one stem, a double entendre. Could this be a similar theme?
Sorry, when was the double cherry on stem written?
Gail, feel free to jump in.
Hi, it's from Midsummer Night's Dream. I think it's Act 3.
Oh, okay.
It's Hermia and Helena talking about, one or the other one is talking about their friendship.
You know, one of the most controversial paintings of the Pre-Raphaelite tradition is called Cherry Ripe. It's painted by Millet, and it's controversial because it shows a disturbingly young girl wearing what some people have seen as sort of fetishist black gloves. She's sitting on a swing, and she's holding in her lap a bunch of freshly picked cherries. And obviously people have made the connection between virginity and so on. But I, in teaching that poem and that picture and hearing many papers, reading many papers about it, I can find no evidence that the word cherry has the colloquial meaning then that it has now in some people's minds.
Thanks. And would Rossetti have been familiar with Shakespeare and the sonnets? I'm assuming
yes,
he would have been.
absolutely. Yes, definitely. So that could well be a kind of just pushing of that two cherries on one stem to one side and using flowers instead. So thank you for that.
I was just thinking about the double stem thing as, I wonder how that horticulturally, does that happen?
We have roses that have a dozen roses on one stem sometimes.
Yeah, but tulips. And if it does, maybe it's something special. And maybe that's more, you know, along Professor Bentley's theme about kind of a recognition of Marx and his heritage.
I did check, and two flowers on one stem are unusual, but of course in Holland they valued the unusual in tulips to a fetishistic degree.
And the tulip wars would have been long over, right?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maureen, I see you have a question about the identity of the angels. Do you mean in the painting or the models? Feel free to unmute if you
Sorry. Yes, we were wondering who the models were of the two angels.
William Morris's daughter, May.
Okay.
For both?
Who by the way, interestingly, has really almost been neglected until about 5 years ago. And suddenly May Morris has become a very, very interesting figure in the later part of the 19th century. And, you know, if anyone is interested in women who are in the sense before their time and who are in the thick of the artistic world at that time, May Morris is worth a look.
Margaretta is a great fan of May Morris, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Who?
Margaretta.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. No, she was an artist.
Thank you. And finally, could you speak a little bit about the color palette and the symbolism of the red throughout? One of the commenters says blue is usually what we think of for a virgin.
Yes, I think this. Well, it's maroon, and then the red of the serifs, if you like. I think everything is gesturing towards the future of passion. That it doesn't really exist yet. It is hoped for, hence the upward-looking gaze. I think the color of virginity here is very much the white of that towel, which is huge. If you look at it, that's a very, very big towel for using as a hand cloth. And of course, in Rossetti's famous Annunciation, Ecce Ancilla Domini, which is his second Pre-Raphaelite painting, the colors, you're quite right, are blue, but also red, color of passion, which can also be religious passion, of course. But the overall quality of the painting, it's white. Rossetti referred to it as his white picture. So the room in which the Virgin has woken up in the morning is white. The bed is white. Her nightgown is white. So very clearly, the whiteness of this picture, probably even the whiteness of, I think, her slightly oddly shaped neck, would again be gestures towards virginity.
Thank you. And thank you to our resident horticulturalist in the audience, Bambi, for posting facts about double-headed tulips, which do exist. I appreciate that, Bambi. Any other comments or questions for our presenters?
Can I make one little comment?
Of course.
If you look very closely at the bed, and we can't do that here, unfortunately, that's reflected in the mirror, you can see that it has only one pillow, not two. So it's not really, it's not a marriage bed. Some people have said that her lover is waiting for her. Well, actually, you can just see it. It's got one pillow in it just by her nose. A lover isn't waiting for her there. She's still a single woman with a white bed that she goes to. So once again, the kind of emphasis on innocence. That's it.
David, that was wonderful. I love that. This painting has always driven me crazy. And I think my issue was I always thought she was putting those jewels on, not taking them off. And that's very interesting. So
I think she takes them off and then puts them on again. But I think at this point she's taken them off in order to wash that hand.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it. It's been just super informative and lots of things we didn't know about the painting we own.
Thank you so much.
I can't put it into words. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaretta. Thank you, Professor Bentley. I hope you all will join us next week when artist Craig Colarusso will join us for Art Chat. Thank you all.